The regulatory agreements. Start by reading the Mass General Law statement. This meeting is being recorded. It will be rebroadcast on the Town of Barnstable's Government Access Channel. In accordance with Massachusetts General Laws, Chapter 30A, Section 20, the chair must inquire whether anyone else is recording this meeting, and if so, to please make their presence known. None noted. This meeting will be replayed via Xfinity Channel 8 or High Definition Channel 1072. It may also be accessed via the Government Access Channel live video in the Man Archives on the Town of Barnstable's website. We'll go ahead and start with roll call. Cynthia?
Committee members: Catherine Ledeck, Ken Alsman,
Here.
Councilor Jeffrey Mendez,
Here.
Councilor John Crow,
Here.
Councilor Matthew Levesque, Councilor Kristen Turkelson, Councilor Charlie Bloom,
Here.
Sheriff Committee Bob Schulte.
Here.
You have quorum.
Just to note, Kristen Turkelson had notified us that she would be out of the country. Charlie Bloom is participating via Zoom, and I believe Kate Connolly was going to be participating via Zoom. I'm not sure if she's with us or not.
And is Seth Etienne going to be?
I was going to say, and I believe Kathy Ledeck indicates she may be a little bit late. And I think Seth Etienne said he would be here at the last meeting, but I have not heard from him other than that. So, but we do have a quorum. So, we have the purpose of the committee, which is to work with the town's planning and development staff to review and reassess recently adopted zoning changes, review the town's use of regulatory agreements, and make recommendations to the council. Just a quick introduction. I'd like to thank the committee and the members of the public for joining us today for what will be our second to last meeting. We appreciate the public's interest in the work of the committee. As always, comments can be provided in person, via Zoom, or in writing. Email comments should be sent to Cynthia Lovell's attention at cynthia.lovell@town.barnstable.ma.us. Please note that ad hoc zoning in the subject line, and Cynthia will forward all emails to the committee members. Quick housekeeping, as I mentioned, this will be our second to the last meeting before the committee sunsets. Following public comments, we have a fair amount to cover today in reviewing the memo. So I'm going to ask the public to keep the comments. I see there's just two people here today, so I'll say 4 to 5 minutes. Just appreciate that.
45 minutes each, that'd be great.
Okay. And we will be closing public comment after the initial comment period. Following public comment, we have a few presentations today by Jim Kupfer, and then we'll be reviewing and discussing the draft memo that Cynthia forwarded to everybody last night. See, we have Seth Etienne. Seth Etienne has just joined us as well. So with that, we will open it to public comment.
Then I'll go.
Hey, Seth, how are you?
Hey, Eric.
Hey, Eric. Hey, folks, thanks very much for
Your name and village,
Oh,
for the
Eric
record.
Schwab, how are you?
Thank
For the
you.
record.
Not that we don't know, but just in case.
Thank you very much for your stamina and for the work you've done. I sent out a email, Cynthia sent out an email earlier today, just recapping some of the zoning issues and proposed recommendations. I structured it as an appendix, but it could easily just go into the minutes and be there for your reference. I think the most important thing that you need to take away from the zoning discussion is that it's not that hard. It's like a little complicated, but if you sit down and work through the problems, you can come up with words that match the problem or solve the problem. And that's what most people haven't been doing. So when I speak to the assistant town manager and ask him, is he gonna tackle, commercial truck zoning? He goes, oh, it's complicated. It's really not that complicated. And in order to demonstrate the simplicity, I sent you some text. Okay, so is that text perfect? No. Is it gonna be the final result? No. But it will get you thinking about zoning and how it's really just little blocks stacked on top of each other. And so you can come up with something. Most important thing, I think, is West Main Street zoning. If you don't act, you're gonna have 5 drive-through restaurants by the end of the year. Like, you really need to do something, and all you have to do is change the designation. It's pretty simple. You know, it shouldn't require a lot of research. Change it from a business district to a neighborhood district. You could do almost anything to change it, but the immediate threat are multiple drive-through restaurants around the high school. And there's nothing in place to stop that right now. So you need to put something in place. The commercial parking is the hottest topic I've ever seen in a community in terms of needing something. I don't think enforcement is enough. I think enforcement's a good start to have enforcement. But I think there's some minor little tweaks you could do to the code to make enforcement more manageable and less expensive. So I suggested a couple of changes there. I think they're pretty coherent. I think you can work with them. Other issues are rental parking. Really, this relates to sort of the gang houses we have in Hyannis, particularly in the summertime. And I think you control that by controlling the parking. You know, there are regs in place to limit the number of adults, unrelated adults living in a property. I mean, those regs are well established. You don't have to touch them. But the restrictions associated with the rental are very loose. There's really no limit on the number of vehicles you can bring into a rental home. And that's how you see these rental houses when you drive by. This is how they become a nuisance to the neighborhood because there's, 20 cars on the front lawn, right? So if you tackle the parking on a rental, and I gave you a couple samples of how you can do that, you might address most of the problem pretty quickly. I mean, you won't see them. They may not go away, but you won't see them so much. And that's what I try to do is try to find the smallest little tweak you can make in order to address the problem. And finally, I have a personal pet peeve, which I slipped in at the last moment, and I apologize for doing that. But I have a spotlight from my neighbor's equipment storage yard shining into my bedroom window, and there's no regulation for spotlights in residential areas. There are very strict regulations in commercial areas, like you can't run a Wendy's, and have a spotlight shining into the neighbor's window. And, people were arguing about whether or not you could have a drive-through, voice-activated microphone, as a noise. And noise is the other thing that's not regulated, almost none. And that we don't cite standards in any of our code. Like, we don't have decibel limits anywhere, particularly in the residential code. So at a minimum, put in a decibel limit so people have something to look up and argue about. And then if possible, put some what's called light trespass code into the commercial occupations in residential areas. And all of that's laid out, and how to do it is in the handout. And again, those are recommendations. I expect they'll change, and I appreciate you even taking a look at it. Thanks so much.
Thank you, Eric. Natalie, would you like to speak?
Okay, yeah. Natalie Pittenger, Hyannis. I just want to say two items, but one is for the somehow creating the empty lots for them, for the commercial people to park their trucks on. If they're not going to be able to park them in their residential homes, they should have someplace. And whether that's a town-run thing or a private operation, I don't know which works out to be the best situation. But it can be worked out. I'm sure somebody, if they got a tax incentive big enough, I guess, could create such a lot. And anyway, I just would encourage, and I don't know if it's part of anything that you people are putting together, but either that and or the town council should think about creating that. I just think it would be a great alleviator for the residents. And then the second thing I just want to quickly mention is we had a situation the other night in the ZBA where a petitioner came in seeking a variance for setback in installing a pool. And apparently the ZBA has a problem with the existing rules for variances with regards to setback. So there will be a letter coming to the town council, probably from me on behalf of the ZBA, once I get all their comments in and get it refined, to get whatever confusion or I'm not even certain of what the clause is that's holding them up, but something is. And it has to do, I think, between the difference between getting a variance for these things and a permit. So, and I think that's what they want, is some relief in terms of understanding what the town would like to see them do. And, you know, Eric was just telling me, and I kind of had an inkling of this, that, you know, these people come in and they pay $600 or $700 to present their case to the ZBA. And the ZBA says, oh, no, we're sorry, we can't rule on that. Well, you know, I think we should either tell them beforehand, you know, that you not take their money and then tell them they can't have what they want. It just seems like that isn't quite right. So anyway, there's a letter in the works that the town council will get, and hopefully we can work out whatever complications exist today. That's it.
Thank you.
Yep.
And do we have anybody on Zoom?
Not currently, no.
Anybody would like to address public comment? I'll just say I want to thank you both, as well as all the members of the public that have appeared beforehand, for the time and effort they put into it. Eric, in particular, I know, do a lot of research and putting together those drafts, and appreciate those very much. So I can tell you that as we go through the draft, you'll see that some of those areas, the West Main zoning district and commercial parking, there are a number that we are proposing to put together and identify as high priority actions that we recommend the council take action on, and those are two of those that we plan to recommend to the council. So,
Bob?
oh yes, Charlie, I'm sorry.
Yeah, no problem. I can't find the raising hand thing on this iPad here, so I'm just going to speak out. Yeah, I think I read Eric's appendix that he sent to us, and it looks good to me. I also want to say to Natalie that not only did you have some confusion the other night on the pool, but there was the confusion on the signage too, and I think that your chairman was wanting something to be done about that with town hall too. There are a lot of variances, I think, that are giving the zoning board of appeals some difficulties. I think there's a lot to take a look at. Looking forward to your letter, Natalie.
Okay. Okay.
Thanks, Charlie.
Thank you.
John.
I also wanted to say to Eric, I just got to look at this the other day or last night. So I will look closer on this. I think most of these things are good ideas, and there's definitely need to be action on what's happening on West Main. And also, of course, with the home occupations, there's no question about it. So I think we'll take that very seriously at the council.
Yeah.
No, really quickly. Thank you both. I mean, I email back and forth to Derek 4 times a week, so he knows I read his stuff. But as far as town hall, the town goes, is, we have to keep in mind that a lot of the rules and regulations that we have as far as zoning, permitting and stuff like that, some of them are antiquated because of the population shift in town. And we have to take that into consideration when we're going through this type of stuff. 20 years ago, this town didn't have this many people. Probably never imagined we would have this many people. So, unfortunately, local government is slow, arduous, and it takes time. But we need people in the public to come out and tell us where we're failing, because we will never know unless we have that. So, you know, we're listening, but it just takes time. Thank you.
Thanks, Jeff. Any other comments? We'll just go through, wanted to acknowledge some written correspondence that we've received over the last few weeks. We received one yesterday and one today from Eric, which I think he's addressed, but mentioned specifically some of the issues that he talked about, the West Main Hyannis, commercial parking, home occupation code. On February 25th, we received an email, I think you all received that before, from Stephen Peckham. He wrote to express his concerns with the proposed new development at 337 Main Street. That's the project at the corner of Main and Ocean. I guess the old Hibbo Museum building is what it was known for. Been known as many things, but most recently the Hibbo Museum. Its concerns were specifically related to the four-story building heights permitted in the overdevelopment of downtown Hyannis. We also received on February 21st, an email from Ann Salas of Marston's Mills, who wrote to the committee with concerns about potential violations of setbacks for construction of the solar farm being constructed at 810 Wakeby Road. And on February 21st, we also received an email from Christopher Gregory of Centerville, wrote to the committee urging us to consider regulations that would increase the potential for density and that would allow more residential areas to upzone to duplexes and triplexes. He also shared articles and links regarding the use of townhomes in Maryland with an aim to increase what was referred to as gentle density, linked to Hoboken, New Jersey, video use of setbacks, tree cover, stormwater, and third, he had some comments regarding Governor Healy's recently released housing report. So those were letters that we all received since I think our last meeting. With that, we will move to item D and Jim Cupfer, who is going to give us a couple presentations today.
Excellent, thank you all.
Thank you, Jim.
Let me, so people at home can see, let me pop it up.
With that new haircut, get on TV.
That's right, that was the whole goal here.
Thank you, guys.
See you later, Eric.
Thank you.
Oh. Can you, allow for sharing? No. Folks at home doing it. Just a moment, sorry. Should be good. Yep, there it is. Thank you. All right. Somebody was taking a sneak peek. All right, here we go. So, before you this evening, in speaking with the chairman, we had two topics that we still needed to go over in terms of short-term rentals and what we phrased as by right zoning, which how I read is more of thinking about our single-family by right housing throughout our community and how it interacts with the other zoning. So today I'm hoping to just kind of go over generally these two items. We haven't had any real zoning changes recently on either of them, though short-term rentals were brought up a few years back, and I'll touch on that. And then really it's just, I think the intent here is to go over these items and think about what next steps for a conversation could be if necessary with town council, maybe some slight recommendations. So what are short-term rentals? They are defined in Massachusetts. They're very specific here. It's actually been updated slightly with the new Housing Act that came through to define specifically 31 days or less. So the short-term rental, 31 days or less, and it's defined here further. We don't have a specific definition locally, so we use this Massachusetts definition here of what a short-term rental is. In 2020, I believe, we procured host compliance software through Inspectional Services, and in building the presentation for today, I spoke with Inspectional Services last week to get an understanding of what that program looks like and what our numbers look like. And so over the past 4 years, we have basically what this does is scour the internet and find all the advertisements for short-term rentals here in our community. In
Can I interrupt one question, just to clarify? So when we see registered STRs in '23
Yep.
of 789, but we see advertised.
You're gonna spoil my next
956,
comment.
No, but you go ahead, sorry. Go ahead.
So yes, advertised. So scouring the internet, finding these advertisements, 689 in 2021, and you can see they're slowly going up. Though 2024 seems to go down a little bit, and maybe that's because we began to enforce in 2021, 2022, and you see these registrations. So only have the last 2 years of required registrations here in our town. So in Barnstable, not everywhere, but in Barnstable, we require these registrations here. And you'll see in 2023, 789 short-term rentals registered with us, though almost 1,000 were advertised. Doesn't mean necessarily almost 1,000 are active short-term rentals. They are put out there, but maybe no one bites, or maybe they're old listings, what have you. But I think it shows that host compliance may be paying off some, because that gap is starting to shrink. Because as you'll see in 2024, 895 advertised, 844 registered. So we don't have 100% compliance, but it's getting a little bit closer. We don't, obviously, we're in middle of 2025, so we don't have those numbers, but Inspection Services has been great, and these numbers are readily available, so we can continue to up those and update the council, certainly. Approximately 5 years ago, the town council did take up this issue, basically stating that short-term rentals are allowed use in a residential dwelling. My understanding, and this is before my time, but some of you probably were a part of that conversation, there wasn't agreement on this, and so it didn't move any further. What we have locally here is simply you must register these short-term rentals. We don't have it codified in our zoning ordinance. Others have, though. Others have codified short-term rentals in many different ways. Everyone seems to start with the same process of registration. Make sure we know what we're talking about here in terms of number of short-term rentals in a community. So this has been a common trend. New York City really drove it home in 2022. And then a lot of other communities have taken it a step further. Principal residence requirement in some communities. So much like we do with our accessory dwelling units, we require you can live in your principal structure and rent your accessory dwelling unit, or you can live in your accessory dwelling unit and rent your principal structure, but not both. And so that's a lot of communities have begun to investigate that and implement that. Same thing with maximum number of listings. A lot of communities are pursuing that. And what that seems to crack down on is kind of commercial operations. So, an investor coming in and buying a whole slew of listings just for revenue sake and not community sake. Real close to home, Nantucket has been struggling with this for many years. Many different articles have been put forward to town meetings, so they have a different form of government. Instead of going to town council, they go to their annual town meeting. I believe they also have a second a spring town meeting as well, or maybe a fall town meeting as well. But they've tackled it, and actually, a lot of words here, but really it touches on a couple of the different aspects that I just communicated about in terms of trying to do owner occupancy, trying to limit the number of short-term rentals, et cetera. So Nantucket's still struggling with that and all the different options there. And so really what's next for Barnstable? I think this is something maybe the committee wants to move a recommendation at minimum to start having that conversation. Because I could tell you from the planning side of things, there hasn't been a clear direction as to which way to go. So we certainly could begin to have those conversations if this committee and the council agrees. Because right now we don't have it codified on our books, period. And as I showed you, we do have the registration, and we're beginning to see compliance with that registration. But really nothing further in terms of Barnstable. So that, happy to answer any questions or have further dialogue on that.
I'll make a couple of remarks. In full disclosure, I was one of the citizens that was very involved back in 2021, concerned with the short-term rental issue in our town. And while I think a lot of the discussion, at least the public and some of the civic associations that were involved, addressed not only concerns with complaints with short-term rentals, but was also the impact on housing. And at the time, there was very little focus by any of the housing advocacy groups or the town council on concerns about the impact it has on our housing, affordability, availability, and consequently, the solution seemed to be, well, we'll get host compliance and we'll make sure everybody's registered. Well, the issue went far beyond just, some of the parking issues Mr. Schwab talks about or shootings that were occurring in some of these STRs. Now we have even the state housing advocacy group saying short-term rentals are a problem. They're taking up, 36% of our housing stock on Cape, I think is what they say. The investors are buying them, and they can make more money in 3 months than they can on a year rental. So it's driven up the prices on housing. So I think the short-term rental issue goes far beyond just problems at individual properties. I think it's impacting our affordability and the housing inventory. And for that reason, I thought it was important that this committee discuss it, bring it to the attention of the council. I don't think we'll be in a position, certainly not here with one more meeting to go, to outline specific regulations, but I think it's very important, in my opinion, that we recommended the town council that they look hard at this issue and develop regulations, whether it be limiting a certain number in our community, changing the number of months or days you can rent, whatever it is. There are, as Jim pointed out, and I've seen, there's lots of information that can guide a town on how to address some of these issues, and I think it's important that the town does do that. So that's my 60-second message. John.
I'll agree with everything you've said. I was also involved back then. It was fought very hard. The original plan was to make no regulations and make that the regulation, that anything goes with short-term rentals. We've come to see that it has really impacted affordable housing throughout the town. It's taken a number of units off that could be year-round rented. And it's just a profit motive, which is, I agree with, but people will use that to the max because you can make so much rent in a 3-month period here versus year-round. And what it causes is numbers of people who have 8-month rentals instead of full-year rentals, and they live out of their car. A number of people who've been on some of our committees have talked about this, about being kicked out, more than one recently, and going from short-term to short-term and renting it during the winter time and then trying to find something during the summer. I have a list that lists many towns throughout the United States, what they have done, how they have. I don't know if you've seen it or not.
No, I haven't seen it, that's great.
I'll get that to you as soon as possible. Lists what Santa Monica has done, what is places in Colorado, throughout the country, what they've done versus primary residence versus how many months you can rent, blah, blah, blah. And there's probably 30 of them, and that includes worldwide. They've had a number of cities that have, Barcelona being one, Paris being another, where they've been overrun by this, and they found out that it's pushing locals out of these historic cities. And they're all just short-term rented, almost all the available properties. So it's a problem worldwide. I think reasonable regulations are called for. We spend a lot of time and money talking about affordable housing here. And when this was going on in 20, the Housing Assistance Corporation was totally quiet about this, and they're responsible for as many units as possible. But these units are going off the 800 or something, and there wasn't a peep out of them. So I think now it's become throughout the state and throughout the town that this is a problem that we need to deal with. I really highly suggest we put something down in our recommendation to the town council. It's coming from other locations too, that we find a way to regulate these to a level that it takes out the profit motive for somebody to buy up a home long distance and only rent that home short term, and leave it empty the rest of the year. A lot of our neighborhoods, my neighborhood is, during the winter, you also have the snowbirds, but then you have the fact that those people are just renting their homes, period. And so I think it's extremely important, and I will get that list to you, because it shows what they have actually done to mediate the problems that they've had throughout the world. So I think it's important. Instead of just looking at Nantucket or looking at P-Town, there's numerous, 20 or 30 in the United States we can look at.
John, can I ask you to send that to Cynthia and ask her to send it to the
I
whole
will.
committee? And when we get to the draft memo, I just put a placeholder in there for short-term rentals because I knew Jim was making this presentation. Again, my thought is, we're not gonna be in a position to make any specific recommendations, but I wanna make sure that we highlight that as a high priority item, particularly in light of the affordability issue, that the town take a look at this and implement some regulations. So obviously, there's a lot of work that would need to be done, and although there was a lot that was done back in 2020, hopefully they can take a look at some of that, some of the things that have been done. There have been a lot of developments, as John said, around the world and in the US on how to address these, so I think there's a lot of creative new ideas that could be considered, so.
I want to say one more thing about the cost, I'm sorry.
No, go ahead, John.
One thing more about the cost to us is that there'll be, there'll be pushback from short-term rentals and everything else, of course. But taking these year-round housing off the market that exists today, okay, is costing us a fortune to find alternatives and to build affordable housing. We spend all this time trying to find locales for it and inclusionary zoning to raise the amount of units that are required by a builder when they're building market rate rentals. A lot of this will be alleviated when 3 to 5% of our housing that's already existing is being taken off the market for this reason. So it'll save us a lot on the other side too, because we're doing all we can to get affordable housing here, and we're losing it right out the other side. And I think that's something that we can do through regulations at a fairly low cost to the town for added housing for affordability. So,
Jeff.
I'm sorry.
The Cape has always had short-term rentals, ever since I can remember. But the difference now is that when I was younger, there were short-term rentals, winter rentals, summer rentals, whatever you want to call them. But college kids would live in there during the winter for, say $400 a month. And in the summertime, the people would rent them, kick you out in April, May. Summertime, they rent them for $1,000 a week, or whatever it was at the time. But with the advent of, the internet, Airbnb, so on and so forth, what's happened, it's just become a full-time business. Now, we have to be cognizant of the fact, though, that there are still people who live in their homes, and in the summertime, they'll go to Nickerson or wherever, they'll camp out, rent their house for the winter. That's how they pay rent their house for the summer. That's how they pay their mortgage for the winter. So what comes to mind to me is that we disincentivize it by either fees or it has to be owner occupied. So the owner would have to stay there for 8 months out of the year or whatever it may be if they want to rent their house out during the summertime. See, I don't see a problem with that. But what's happened is it's turned into a cottage industry. So the way you get rid of a cottage industry is you have to disincentivize it. Either we have to drive up the fees for the ones who do this for a living, for the investors who come in and will buy 2, 3, 4, 5 houses. That's the only way we'll be able to put the toothpaste back in the tube. We just have to make it be, prohibitive for it to be affordable or to be profitable. But as far as, local people who use this as a means to stay local, I don't think we should play with that at all. I think we should allow that to happen. Because I do see the problem. And, when I travel a lot. Once in a while, I do the short-term rentals. I do. But I'm also not a member of that community, so I don't know what their housing problems are. And when we have a housing issue like we do, We have to pick from each category of the deficiency to make it whole again. So that's why I'm saying, we have to get to a point where, if somebody wants to buy a house for an investment, one house and rent it as a short term, that's one thing. We can quibble over the numbers. But people own 2, 3, 4 houses and that's what they use it for. And especially if they don't rent it during the winter. That's adding to the problem. And I'm a short-term rental advocate, I am. But we have to see it for what it is and the detriment it's causing to the community. So we have to have a nuanced approach to it, but I think something definitely has to be done.
I would just say, Jeff, I think I agree with you on most of those things. I think one of the things that was important to the groups that were involved and the recommendations that were made to the council at the time were, we understand that Cape has a long-standing history of rentals. That's where a lot of people do that for those summers. And there was not an intent to take that opportunity away. It's the 1 and 2 night, or it's the person who has 3 or 4 of these and does operate his business. Because there's a whole, we won't even go down that rabbit hole, but is running short-term rental, conducting a business in a residential area? We can debate that, particularly if you own 3 or 4 and that's what you do.
Yeah,
But
sure.
again, we're not gonna tackle that
Yeah.
here. But you're right, we don't want to destroy the longstanding tradition of summer rentals for people who rent for, months or a week or whatever. It's the 1 and 2 nights, units around the town. That's where the problems really begin. So, and there's lots of ways to address those and stuff. Again, we won't solve them in this committee, but the recommendation is that it's time, particularly now when you have the state and housing advocates saying it's a problem, it's gotta be looked at. So,
I agree with you 100%, but that goes back to what I said previous during comment to public comment. When issues arise like this, people want a quick fix when there's not a quick fix.
yeah,
You know what I mean? Nobody anticipated this being this way 20 years ago.
Yeah.
Because like I said, we used to, when we were in school, winter rental would come up, 5 of us would pile in there, keg parties, the whole 9 yards. But the Cape has changed. So we have to kind of change with the times. But we have to allow government to do that change.
okay. Well, I think, I'm sorry, John, go ahead.
I just want to say I have to agree with most of what Jeff says, if not all. One of the things back in the day, we decided that there was a tradition of renting. Even the big homes, the kids inherit their big home on the water, they can't afford it. The taxes, instead of selling it, trying to keep the family, they rent it for the whole summer. And that's not a short-term rental, okay? That's over 30 days, or 31 days. So that's something that we want to maintain, because we realize that the costs have gotten so much now for property taxes and everything else. A lot of people won't be able to live here if they can't, shag a couch at their brother or sister's place for a few months during the summer. So that's not something we've ever been really against. It's the week to week to week. So if you're gonna rent your house for the month or over, go for it, because that's a important thing, tradition here. And it's become to be relied on.
Cut you off, but wouldn't it the quick fix to that would be to cut property taxes for year-round owners on Cape, and then to raise the property taxes on people who use their second or third residences on Cape?
That could be a way of doing it, but I think that may be difficult in doing that, changing the tax split. That's something we can talk about. But I think what's happened is, I think, as you'll see, the compilation we have is that about all these different cities and towns, as many of them have, if like 70 or 80% has, it has to be your primary residence. So therefore, you can't use a second home and declare that your primary residence. Your primary residence may be in Florida as an investor or whatever, but if you're going to short-term rental, that's got to be your primary residence. And that will cut out almost 90% of these things. And that way, we allow people who have homes to rent it for a period of time longer than, or short-term for a short period of time and longer-term for longer.
No, I think the good thing is I think we all agree,
Yeah,
in principle, that there's a serious problem
yeah,
that needs to be addressed. It's just getting there,
yeah.
but.
Yeah, so I think,
Complicated.
so I think what we'll do, after we go through the draft, we have, like I said, a place to put in some comments there. And maybe, John, if you send that, we'll take a look at that. Maybe the committee will identify a couple potential, things that the council might want to look at. To your comment, Cynthia, I think there's already an essentially kind of a de facto penalty, if you will, for someone who has multiple houses, because they wouldn't be able to get the residential exemption like John mentioned. So, it's not a direct penalty. Maybe there's something else, a higher tax or whatever for someone who's running them as a short-term rental versus living in it and stuff. But again, there's lots of ways to address those things. So
Just to what Jeff said earlier, obviously it's not a harsh enough penalty for it to disincentivize the practice. And then to Jim, the data that you presented for advertised and registered SDRs, does that data, is it also attached to the location?
Yep, yes, they have.
So you've seen like on a map and see like where it is distributed throughout Barnstable?
Yes, I believe they have that.
Okay.
One thing to remember, Seth, also, is the state has the ability to tax these at 17.85%, short-term rentals, so they are being taxed as a revenue stream at a higher rate than your own home. So that's already in the rules. I don't know if we don't get the whole 17.85%.
We get a portion of it.
But we get a portion of it, and the state gets a portion of everything else.
So I wonder if there's like a back way, like a backdoor way we can institute some kind of fee
Yeah.
on a municipal level. If you have like a short-term rental and say it's $1,000 a week, okay, well, you're gonna have to pay us $450 a week. Something like that. I mean, obviously I'm pulling numbers out of the air, but you know what I'm saying. I don't know if you can legally do that, but
and I can't remember, I know the state has certain limits on what they can charge for fees. I guess that's more penalties, but for example, right now, what does it cost? $90 to register your house as a short-term rental?
Yeah, I'm not certain, but probably in that ballpark.
We might think about something,
Yeah.
$90 ain't much at all, when you consider how much they're making, how much they're taking away our affordable, our housing inventory. $90 is pretty cheap. So maybe there's some way to look at that as well. So again, beyond the scope of what we're gonna talk about, but we'll make some recommendations there. Jim, I was gonna just comment, I'm very happy to see those numbers, that the number registered and the number advertised is coming closer to be in line, because I know when they first talked about doing that and looking at it, I remember we pulled the state's registration of STRs versus what Barnstable's was. There was a huge disparity. So there was a lot more people, the state thought, versus what people were actually registering locally. So there were a lot of people who were advertising, and until we started capturing what was advertised in terms of numbers, we had no idea how many were registered versus how many were advertised. Because there's still a lot of people that register on sites. The majority are probably VRBO and Airbnb, 2 or 3, and I know the company Host Compliance tracks more than that, but there's a lot of that's word of mouth, other sources, Craigslist. Craigslist was one that I don't think they track, and I don't know how many people rent from Craigslist, but anyways. So I'm happy to see those numbers coming a little bit closer to being in line, so. All right, let's any more comments on that. We'll ask Jim for our next presentation.
Pop that back on.
Ah.
Are you still with us?
Thank you.
Rename the laws.
Thought I was done.
Thanks, Jim.
No problem, Charlie. There we go. All right. So next is our by right zoning, so single family zoning. And when I say by right zoning, there's other by right opportunities in our zoning, but I think what we were referring to this evening is just honing in on our kind of our single family zoning districts, kind of understanding the nuances of those and how it relates to our zoning across town. So in the 1950s, our zoning was 8 pages long in 3 districts. Now we have however many this is, and then this doesn't even include our overlay districts and accessory uses, et cetera, et cetera. So our residential districts on our left, those are all predominantly single-family zoning districts, with the exception of, I believe, 2, the 2 on the bottom, and maybe the Pond Village District. I can't recall now on that one. The commercial districts to the right are exactly as it sounds, commercial. However, there's some nuances there. There's some village districts, and those, and I'll touch on one in a little bit that has some mixed use opportunities there. And then, as you guys are very well familiar with now, the downtown Hyannis zoning districts are a whole another list of mixed use zoning districts. So all these residential districts that I mentioned on that left side, this is essentially an example of the residential district and the principal permitted use. And it's exactly that, a single family residential dwelling detached. That's in, so residential B, residential C, et cetera, all the way down that list. And then there are some conditional uses, mostly, as I think Jeff touched on, our zoning be a little antiquated. Stuff like golf courses and horse farms, et cetera, are allowed in some of these districts. This is what it looks geographically. It looks like a lot of convoluted zoning, but in reality, everything that starts with the R is single-family zoning. And then I left on the overlay of the Resource Protection Overlay District, which we've touched on from time to time with this group. That's the left hatch, so that's the red, and that's 2 acre zoning. So all where you see the R districts, those are single family zoning districts, and but those on the right can range in size, but predominantly 1 acre zoning. Those on the left is in the Resource Protection Overlay District are 2 acre zoning. But you'll see, and I'll touch on a little bit further in a moment, those red outlines within the hatch, and those are some exceptions. Those are kind of our village districts, and I'll talk about that in a moment. So our Resource Protection Overlay District, really how it's codified is in Section D of the Resource Protection Overlay District. Essentially says residential zoning district shall be 87,120 square feet, which is essentially 2 acres, and that overrides the base zoning district. So for any new development, any new parcel being created, 2 acres must be adhered to. So now taking off the residential zoning districts and leaving on the Resource Protection Overlay District, you see a number of carve-outs. And those are those smaller zoning districts that are predominantly meant for our village centers, though there are some exceptions. If you see 28 running east to west, those carve-outs are 2 big plazas, so like Bell Tower, and then further down where the Stop and Shop is before you get to Katuitt. There's 2 kind of business districts out that way. Village center examples. So this one is, I don't know if the light will work on this. No, it doesn't. The Marston's Mills zoning district is right here. So this is Main Street. The Marston's Mills zoning district right there. The Plaza, Bell Tower, Stop and Shop right there. Osterville districts, the BA districts, and West Barnstable Village district.
Jim, while you're up there.
Yep.
2 downtown Village Osterville, but that long strip above on, what is that?
That's BA, Business A district, and that's why those little shops are allowed, is because it's in the business district.
That's north of town.
Yeah.
Between Bumps River Road and.
For you who live there, that is north of town. For me, who goes through Main Street, that's Osterville Center. But it is, it's in the BA district, which allows for, and when we talk about antiquated zoning, allows for a number of different uses, but place of business, including baker, blacksmith, builder, clothes cleaner, confectioner,
decorator, and it goes on and on and on. So,
Marriage maker.
yeah, that's one of those we could probably update. Yes.
Just a question, Jim, while you got this map up here. I know a lot of, when you hear it's 2 acre zoning, I think everybody immediately thinks, oh, everything that's gonna be built, there's gonna be 2 acres. As a practical matter, a lot of what's in that red hatched area is unbuildable. If you look at the Sandy Neck Beach and all those areas, there's wetlands in there. Of the amount of land that's available to be built on, that isn't already designated as lots, I mean, as a practical matter, is there really much within that area that could be created? You say newly created parcels, 2 acre zones. I mean, is there really that much land that's available to create 2 acres, or has a lot of that already been subdivided or protected in some way? I think a lot of people say, oh, once it was all 2 acre zoning, everyone's gonna build McMansions. The reality is that really can't happen though, right?
Well, so there's a lot of land that's already been built out. I'm always hesitant to say that there isn't land that can be further developed because there's always something that appears. And so I would say there are several acres that are well above 2 acres that are not constructed on now that could be subdivided in the future. You think of probably everyone, as you're thinking about you're moving out west, in our community can think of a farm or someone's property that is well above 2 acres.
Golf course.
A golf course is a great example. Yes, all of those type of properties that when you're thinking about it, you're like, yeah, there is that one, and there's always one more that just magically appears somehow.
Yeah, and don't leave out too, again, this goes back to antiquated thinking, this goes back to the building boom in the 80s and the creation of the Cape Cod Commission. A lot of that buildable property was taken off the tax rolls by different organizations, Municipal Land Trust for one. So we've lost a lot of buildable property through that process, because after the 80s, we overcorrected. And that's why part of the problem we have now with land, the cost of land and stuff like that is because a lot of these organizations have come and absorbed a lot of the property that would otherwise be buildable.
But to your point, yes, I say 2 acre zoning, everything has to be 2 acre lots. To Jeff's point, there was a lot of building in the 60s, 70s, 80s. So a lot of that predates the resource protection overlay, and that's when you go out and you see a lot of 10,000 square foot lots or half an acre lots. And so those can continue to be pre-existing, non-conforming, and continue to build up. I've worked in the city of Newton, town of Sudbury, both very affluent communities that over time evolve, and you'll see those lots, and we see it here. Those smaller structures that were created back in the 50s, 60s, 70s. And now all of a sudden they're much larger structures, but that lot doesn't change. That lot size doesn't change because it's not required to change. But any new lot that's created, would have to be 2 acres. And there certainly are a number of places, as Ken mentioned. I could think of at least a golf course, if not multiple golf courses, multiple farms. But a lot is protected out there. BLT did. Town continually is looking to protect property out that way.
Okay, thank you.
Yep.
See, and I think that's something we have to be cognizant of as a town. When we're discussing housing shortages, so on and so forth, we have to be cognizant of not only the money it's costing us to the treasurer as far as tax revenue goes, but also livable space for people to build. Because as I said before, I'll say it again, you can't do it anymore. Hyannis is done. We're full. We really are. We can't just, we have property where you can build, but we just don't have the infrastructure to support what's here now, never mind adding another 300, 400, 500 people. So we're gonna have to come to a place as a town where we think a little bit outside of the box and incentivize people to build in the outer villages, because that's the only place where we can really build and people still have a quality of life.
Cost is a big thing, Jeff.
Yeah.
Because my husband and I, we have enough land to put on an ADU,
Mhm.
but I'm not putting one on for $250,000. So I might as well just buy a house.
You got the money.
Yep.
No, I realize that, but what I mean by it's not necessarily ADU, because there's developers that can build beautiful homes out there. And people will pay market rate for those homes. You know, so there's the need is there. But the town has to have a desire to make sure that need is met. Because like I said, Hyannis is just, it's a mess.
Where did you get a bid for $250,000?
I was gonna say it's low.
I'm thinking like 700, because you're building a new house, basically, and from start to finish.
If you upgrade your septic and you buy a modular,
Oh, modular, okay, yeah,
then you can do it a lot cheaper than hiring somebody local.
yeah.
Because we mapped it all out, but what cost me the most was I had to add either another septic or increase the one I currently have, which again is just like putting in a new one. So that was where the biggest cost was.
$25,000, $30,000 really.
I can get a house for 50 grand, but it's the septic because I'm also near Schubel's,
Oh, boy, yeah.
which
You
is
might get an IA if you had to.
Yeah, I'd have to do something like that because I'm right on Willimantic, and at the end of Willimantic is Schubel's.
I know where it is, yeah.
So, you know, I wouldn't want to put in a Title V knowing that I'm that close to a pond. So I'd have to go something, and that's where the cost is.
And those are
Because
now-
none of that has not been accepted yet, the IAs here. They're still asking you to do Title V, which my husband and I aren't comfortable with living that close to a pond.
So, just getting back to it real quick, I only have a few more here. So village centers, you know, since 2010, we did begin to look at different village centers and provide some opportunities for mixed use. So there are currently in the zoning today, village center where there is retail on the first floor and potential for apartments above. So I want to highlight that because that's currently in the zoning. Residential apartment units above not to exceed 4 apartment units. So it's low density development, but nevertheless, it still is within the village centers there. So future initiatives, I mean, the local comprehensive planning committee has been talking about this quite a bit and trying to you know, preserve our village centers. That's something very unique to Barnstable and the Cape, really in general. And so, you know, thinking about different ways in which we can preserve our the footprint of the village centers, while also providing opportunities. Expecting to protect the Resource Protection Overlay District. There's been a lot about trying to preserve tree canopy and our resources, so potentially maybe even expanding the RPOD. And then again, preserving historic growth patterns and that balance. I mean, I already heard it here tonight talking about, you know, we need that balance of continue to evolve as a community, but also protecting our resources. So that's really been the highlight of what we're thinking about over the next 5-10 years. Yeah, and with that, you know, that's basically the last framework, I think, of what this committee has really taken on in terms of our zoning. You know, we've talked about the downtown Hyannis zone, and we talked about a lot of different accessory zoning districts, like solar, for instance. And so these are kind of the last two. Happy to take any comments or questions on this one.
Just make a general comment again. You know, I think, given there's the LCP committee that's been going on, you got the housing committee, the ad hoc housing. I think generally try not to, you know, trample on their business, if you will. Some of these issues overlap no more than the inclusionary housing ordinance. We talked about that with Rick Presby and Laura Schufeld. There are some overriding issues that, you know, cover all the different areas. So we didn't go into any detail here. I think, Jim, you know, watching the LCP and attending the meetings, I think what you've heard from the community and some of the surveys that were done, that they don't want the single-family residential zoning wiped out or erased. There's been, you know, at least one of the surveys showed that the primary interest was in more single-family residential housing. Again, I'm thinking that, you know, our committee might make, similar to the short-term rental regulation, again, this is something that the town needs to look at and address. There may be some thoughts that we share with them, but again, I don't want to try and, make recommendations that would either contradict to these other committees that are specifically responsible for addressing those issues. But I think the town is clearly aware of it. They're hearing it from the public. We got a lot of comments. If you read through some of the things that we've received, there's a lot of people who have said that don't change the single-family residential zoning. So we've heard it at our committee. I know the others are hearing it as well. But again, since it involves zoning as a big picture for our town, I thought it was important to hear from Jim on that, and that we at least talk a little bit about it and maybe make a general comment in our memo to the town council. So just my thoughts.
I think you're exactly right. I think that there's so much overlap, with zoning, with housing, so on and so forth, that I think it's appropriate for us to make a comment on it. I really do. Because, it's pit and parcel. Can't have one without the other. And these are issues that touch on all these committees. So I think it's perfectly appropriate for us to have a comment on it.
Okay.
Absolutely.
We're just suggesting that the town council look at these, and these are the important issues, and I think that's exactly what we're supposed to do.
Yeah. No,
We're not gonna we're not gonna do the nuts and bolts on it, we're
Yeah.
just saying this is a high priority.
Yeah, no, I agree with that, yeah, absolutely.
Okay.
I think that one of the things I've been sort of noodling around is the sense of dealing with zoning and dealing with residential neighborhoods. And I think in Hyannis, the issues that we've heard about, the sort of the invasion taking place and that sort of thing, have to do with neighborhoods. They're single family, they're residential, but we haven't really talked about them as neighborhoods. It's pretty easy in some of the villages to talk about the village as being the whole thing. But, the problems I've seen are really related to a changing character of a residential neighborhood, which allows things that would not be allowed in an industrial area. I think some of the pictures that Eric has shown, they'd be kicked out of most industrial areas or retail areas or something else, and yet we haven't got the tools to make it happen for, the little old lady, and I'm allowed to say little old right now. But, for those kind of families in a neighborhood, what do they do? It's changed, it's a problem. All kinds of, the whole aspect we were talking about earlier, I didn't say anything because I sort of started off on the Cape by buying several houses at the same time because I had a wind fill happen when I lived in California. And we came out, we ended up we bought 3 properties here on the Cape. They weren't always in the same town. A couple were in Katuitt, a couple were over in Mashpee. And we rented those out year round if we could, because we couldn't handle 3,000 miles away dealing with short-term rental. We didn't have the programs like they have now. But, so anyway, I have not been able to figure out how to blend the idea and get the idea across that neighborhoods, particularly in Hyannis, are so critical to the future of this part of Barnstable. And if we let them go, they're gonna, I think it's gonna be major problems. So the whole aspect of zoning, enforcement, and sort of defining the neighborhood. How do you help a neighborhood get reheal itself? Sort of like we're trying to do in downtown. We're trying to reheal, restore the image of downtown Hyannis. And I think, you've got a lot of things going to make that happen. And I really give a lot of credit for the town to look at doing that. But the neighborhoods are sort of another step that has to be taken a look at.
And Ken, we had a subcommittee meeting earlier this week. Ken, you mentioned this to the subcommittee, so I know you shared some information, thoughts. So, as Ken works through that, we may see if there's somewhere in the memo when we put out the next draft for everybody's review, we may include something about that, some commentary or whatever. So, how we define that. But.
Yeah, I have to totally agree with you. When I was in my working days, I spent a lot of time on all the neighborhoods in West Main. And before I came out to Osterville to deliver in that area, Marston's Mills. So I know all those little neighborhoods. You go on West Main Street, you take a right or a left on any of those streets, and they're immediately small neighborhoods. And,
I was fortunate enough to get
Understand what
a
you're-
tour from Eric,
Yeah.
who showed me around. I mean, I said, hey, I don't know what's going on in Hyannis, and he was talking about the problems that the neighborhood's in, and we took an hour or so and rode around and looked at the neighborhoods. I had never seen those places before. And because they are, as you say, they're sort of hidden in the back, and they don't get everybody's attention every day. So.
And like any other neighborhood, my neighborhood or your neighborhood, anything else, you wanna make sure this remains a neighborhood. It's not a business district.
Yeah.
Okay, and that goes to SDRs, it goes to parking regulations, it goes to home occupations. They're getting out of hand in Hyannis, but they're out of hand in a lot of other places
Yeah.
too. I've got a problem next door to me, so it's like, I think what we're doing here is important to let the council know that those are our priorities.
So don't you recognize the discrepancy like what we've just spoken about? On one hand, we've heard from the public saying that we want to maintain single-family zoning,
Yeah.
but we've just spoken about how can just discover new neighborhoods in Hyannis. Have we heard about the people that live in those neighborhoods and what they would have to say about zoning?
Yeah, me.
Yeah, exactly. So,
Because not to interrupt you, Seth, but you're young, so let me give you the skinny about what's happened in Hyannis, okay? I bought my first house when I was 23 years old on Megan Road. I still own that house. I've had several houses since. When I bought that house on Megan Road, that was one of the nicest neighborhoods you would ever go through.
And it went down after you bought
Well
it?
manicured. It was no junk. Everybody took care of their properties. But when I bought it, it was when people that lived there, their kids were grown, they had grandchildren, they were aging out. Okay, so as the outer villages got more expensive, the working class, as they sold their houses, started filling those houses. Then came, it used to be the Irish J1s would come down in the summertime, right? Then it started with the Brazilian J1s would come down. Then the Eastern Europeans, now it's, South Americans and so on and so forth. They came in with a different culture. They came in with a family-oriented culture, where it was an immigrant culture, which a lot of us forgot about because we were far removed from the immigrant experience. With that culture becomes communal living. So it's not only the father, the mother, and the two kids, it's the grandmother, the uncle, the aunt, the two kids. That's what they used to live in their country. So with what comes with that is the problems that we have now. Then you factor in affordability.
Sorry about that.
And so that now instead of having, 3 college kids, it's 7 college kids because they just can't afford it. So what's happened is that it goes downstream. So what was once a vibrant middle-class neighborhood has become a lower income neighborhood, not because of the fault of the people, but the fault of the circumstance. So that's what's happening right now. And people bring their culture, people bring all that stuff with them. They're not aware of the laws and the way that stuff goes. You know what I mean? And it's up to us as a town to show them that. So that's what's happened, and that's indicative of what's happening in Hyannis, and now what's happening in Centerville. Because it's bleeding out. Because there's no other places to do it in Hyannis anymore. That's what happened in West Yarmouth. Now it's happening in South Yarmouth. It totally destroyed Dennisport. Totally destroyed Dennisport. You know what I mean? You think we have it bad? Go take a ride through Dennisport. They have it really bad. So what it is, it's a number of things. Immigration, affordability, resources, and the housing availability. So those houses in my neighborhood that once belonged to retirees, young families would get them, then they would retire. They've sold out for the buck to people who are gonna put 7, 8, 9 people in there. And so it's destroyed the fabric of the neighborhood. And what it does is it destroys people's investments. If I didn't buy that house when I bought it, I would have sold that house 20 years ago. I'll tell you right now. I would have. Because it's just, I don't know how somebody can pay $600,000 for a house in that neighborhood. And that's the problem. I bought that house for $70,000. Now, $600,000 to buy a house in that neighborhood. So that's the problem. You know, and it's not easily solvable, so it's up to us as a town to regulate it, because that's the only way you're gonna get it back.
There's regulation and you mentioned somehow going in and educating people.
Yeah.
Talking to them at least about, okay, what can we do here? I would lay odds that those people in those neighborhoods would love to have something happen that's positive.
Absolutely.
I worked, my first job in planning was in Trenton, New Jersey, in a subdivision that was, not a subdivision, but a residential area that was built during the Revolutionary War. And it had gone way downhill. And we went out and started just talking to people, and pretty soon people were interested. What are those guys doing? And they kind of got excited about, and they would be planting flowers in their window boxes, which they hadn't seen flowers for years, and talking to each other about, okay, what could we do? I mean, and I think it was a very important thing. But politically, it ended up, because the mayor had bought a house in that area and restored it as an example of what could be done, it became a political thing, and they had totally eliminated any programs that were operating there.
Yeah.
But
And it's not the majority, it's only a small few, but that's all it takes.
that's all it takes.
That's all it takes.
And I think that's the kind of thing that subliminally that people who may be thinking, well, I don't want to have that happen to me, so I've got to fight any of that higher density, and I've got to fight all of that because I've worked my butt off to get what I got, and it's not right, but it's natural.
And for most people, their home is their biggest investment they'll ever make.
Yeah.
For most people.
Yeah.
You know, so, you know, it's a real issue. But, you know, and it's in every town. You know, I don't have a place on Marston's Mills. You know what I mean? We used to own 70 acres around that house. My grandfather would be turned over in his grave if he saw some of the way that people keep their yards and stuff.
Yeah.
In the junk. You know what I mean? In the junk. And the thing about it, when it comes right down to it, as a town, we've let it happen. That's just the bottom line.
Yeah, I made the comment earlier about, some of the things that we've seen would not be allowed in an industrial area. They'd say, well, you can't do that. But we let it happen in residential neighborhoods.
I will have to say, that's the best explanation historically. I used to, 25 years ago, Megan was on a regular day, I was going down the day. I haven't seen it since, so I don't know what you're talking about, but I agree with you, and that's the historical record of how we've gotten to where we are. And it's the best I've ever heard it explained.
Thank you.
Well, no, keep going.
So I just say thank you for the comments. I want to thank Jim for the presentation on those two areas.
Well done,
And just note, and note that Kathy Ledeck has joined us, so.
Sorry for the delay.
So just Kathy, we went through the general stuff, we were just kind of talking about, Jane gave us two presentations on short-term rental and by right zoning, just some of the information. And I think, what we've decided is, again, those are topics that we have not had an opportunity to really drill down on and aren't gonna make any specific recommendations other than to highlight those to the town council as areas that need to be looked at more closely, so. With that, I think I'd like to move to item E, which is a discussion of the draft memo. Hopefully you all received from Cynthia last night an updated version of the memo. Just as quick background for those that are not on the subcommittee. I made a first pass at drafting the memo, which was then circulated to the subcommittee, which is comprised of Kathy Ledeck, Ken Alsman, John Crow, and myself, and then we met earlier this week to go through that. And what you'll see before you is a red line, although it's a black and white, so you can't see the red lines. Although, do you need a copy, Jim? Oh, you got a copy.
I get one.
Everyone has a copy in their packet.
Okay.
Sure. Oh, yeah, okay.
So you'll see the underlined areas were added post-review with the subcommittee. And I'll be honest with you, I wanted everybody to have this at least 24 hours ahead of time, so I didn't get everything incorporated into that the subcommittee discussed, so there are still some things that will be included. We're gonna try and meet again the week of the 24th, hopefully on the 24th, to go through for another pass on that as well. But I wanted to, maybe, I don't know if anybody has any initial comments having read it, or we can just kind of go through this. Essentially, I followed the topic outline that we discussed and the committee approved at our last meeting, have fleshed that out in the detailed memo that you see here. Start with, I'll just quickly go through here the introduction, gave the background of the committee. We talked a little bit about the purpose of the committee, the processes that we undertook as part of the committee, including the presentations by subject experts, public comment, and then a summary of what the memorandum of recommendations, which is the output of our committee. Then going into page 4 of the draft, we took the two major topic areas that we discussed, for each of which Jim put together the memo that's been shared with you. I'm going to ask Jim at some point, we'll finalize those memos. So the first one is section 3, which is the review of chapter 168, the regulatory agreement. And in that section on pages 4, 5, and 6, we highlighted the items that were summarized in Jim's memo, which were the key topics that we identified under regulatory agreements that were recommendations to the council. Those being some amendments to the regulatory map, processes that would include earlier involvement of the public and reporting. A lot of those came from our discussions with Steve Robichaud of the Planning Department at one of our early meetings. Talked about one of the key things as part of regulatory agreements. Looking at page 5 now is guidance to the town council on what are priority defined public benefits. And then the fourth item was regulatory agreement enforcement. We discussed that, and Kate gave us background on that as to those are really enforced from the legal versus enforcement officers or the building inspector. So we had some recommendations there on what might be done, whether it be hiring or appointing someone as a regulatory agreement enforcement, just how we'd go about that. So that was the key topic. Then we moved to section 4, starting on page 6, which were the chapter 240, largely dealing with the downtown Hyannis zoning. And we talked about exempt uses as one of the areas that we talked about. That needs to be fleshed out a little bit more with some more examples. On page 7, we moved to the downtown Hyannis zoning. And we've identified what we thought were the high priority actions for the council. I intend to include those when I put together the executive summary. We'll include a list of what we think are the high priority actions to draw their attention to those issues. But we talked about the parking, the building standards, which we touched upon and Jim and I talked about. That was changing the start of the downtown Hyannis zoning. So we started Center Street and Old Colony Road rather than starting at Ocean Street, a block further. The building heights, the district boundaries. And I think where we landed on that, Jim gave us two options. One was to take the downtown village and basically just reduce the building height for that one, but keep it the same, or the other option would be to change that to the downtown neighborhood, which would maintain more of the neighborhood areas. And the committee, my take was that we had agreed that we would propose to the council to consider changing that to the downtown neighbor. So I don't have the map before me, but it was the light purple to a yellow, if I'm not mistaken. So those were kind of the key downtown Hyannis zoning. And then at the bottom of page 8, and for the remainder of the memo, we've identified the other key topics that we talked about, obviously within the constraints of the time that we had, although hard to believe it's been 8, almost 9 months. We obviously couldn't drill down on every topic and provide the same level of specifics, but I think one of the key ones, and the one we started out as a high priority action, was the inclusionary affordable housing ordinance. And that's where we had Liv Presby and Laura Schufeld come and speak to us. And that was a little bit more detailed on what some of the specific options might be or considerations that we included. Again, given the importance of the affordable housing in the community, we thought that was an important one to highlight. Item B on page 10 was the short-term rental regulations. As I mentioned earlier, didn't have anything in this because I wanted to wait till Jim's presentation, but I think the nature of the recommendation will be that this is something the council needs to take a look at. We might highlight a few things that they might want to consider without giving a specific set of regulations. There's a lot more involved. The zoning enforcement issue, we stayed away from making any specific recommendations at the advice of council, but we did identify the fact that this was a topic that was of great interest to the community. We've heard a lot about that and ultimately encouraged the town. We know there's been a formation of a cross-departmental group to address that and encourage the town council to continue to move forward on that because that is something important to the town. And then we get to some of the other items on page 11. These are some of the things that Mr. Schwab and a number of other citizens have brought to our attention. The commercial vehicle parking ordinance, some of the things we've been talking about, which you just addressed, Jeff. The parking and rental properties. The West Main Street zoning amendment on page 12. That has taken on a life of itself with the recent permitting, I guess, of the Wendy's with the drive-through. Clearly, something that the council and the zoning ZBA has been looking at. I think there's a lot of action. I think the council's been talking about that. So again, just reinforcing what we've heard from the public, and we think the importance of the town council looking at that. And then another area that we talked about, again, addressing, and I think Ms. Pittenger said it today, making sure that we create or preserve areas within some of what's already zoned as industrial or industrial limited. Independence Park was created with the plan to create the small business contractor bays, parking, and it's now kind of being gobbled up by housing and retail. And the thought is we want to recommend to the council that, you know, this is an important thing, whether it's preserving areas there that have to be used for that purpose. I think, Jeff, you might have mentioned one of the early meetings, maybe we look at the high school property or some of the excess property the town is not using now. Somehow we find a way to address that by creating opportunities for parking for some of the contractors. Take some of what we see landing in our residential neighborhoods and make sure, we can tell them not to do it, but we need to provide people with an opportunity to do something else. There's got to be an option for them. So, you know, we have an item on page 12 where we stress to the council the importance of doing that. Then on page 13, solar installation regulations. Jim, a couple of meetings back, gave us a presentation. Jim, I know that you mentioned, I think there was one that you had some thoughts on. I don't know if it was more noise related?
Yeah, impacts from solar to the surrounding area. I can offer some language for you.
And I want to ask you, because I'd like to talk to you afterwards. We all got the letter from Ann Salas. I know there's a lot of issues going on over there. I'm not sure, again, you know, what kind of specific comments we might make, but again, I think this is obviously a topic that, you know, is an issue to a lot of citizens, and I know there's some concerns, Jim, you expressed that, you know, we're kind of, with the Dover Amendment, you know, our hands are somewhat tied, but, you know, there may be some things that the town can do in that, so I would like to talk to Jim and maybe get a little bit more thoughts, particularly on what your thoughts were, that we'll include that in the next draft. And then finally, with some of the climate-related requirements. Kathy gave us a great presentation a couple of meetings ago, and I reached out to her and asked her if she could share with me her thoughts, rather than me try and write that we'll include that again in the next draft. So those were the key areas that we addressed in the memo. Open it up to comments in a few minutes here. Just the thinking is that, you know, I'd like everybody to take a look at that after this meeting. I know you didn't have a lot of time to look at it ahead of time, but ask people if they could look at it, and by next Friday, the 21st, if you have any comments or thoughts, if you could email those to Cynthia so that she can send them to the whole committee, so we're complying with open meeting law requirements. And then the subcommittee is I'm gonna ask if they can meet on the 24th, so that we'll be able to review those comments, put together another updated draft that I will circulate to everybody, ask Cynthia to circulate before our final meeting on the 28th, so that we can go through that and hopefully approve the final version of that. So I've talked too much, so if anybody has any specific comments, thoughts at this point. I know, Seth, you did mention at the last meeting that you probably wanted to make some comments. I'm not sure if you're waiting for this memo to make the comments, but I would ask that you send that to Cynthia so she can send it to everybody. Depending on the nature of the comments, again, obviously, you know, there's various opinions at the table. We're not gonna reach unanimity on everything, but I wanna make sure I've reflected in the memo. I've mentioned specifically that we've seen a wide range of comments from both the committee and the public. Everything from a full moratorium on building to don't do anything, leave it the way it is. And I think what this committee is, at least as the chair, my attempt has been to try and reach some sort of consensus. And I think all the opinions that have been expressed in here in the draft reflect the consensus. While we may not all agree on everything specifically, I think there is a consensus at this point. So if there's any other strong opinions, I ask that you share them, and you know, we will discuss those. So
I want to say we're almost completely finished with this and a few more edits, but this is a terrific document. Considering all we've talked about, it's almost all in here, which is a good, you've done a good job, a very good job putting this together. It's a very professional document. I think the council will be appreciative of seeing something this well done.
well, thank you. Charlie and I had an exchange earlier. You know, and again, it's not our last meeting, but it's been a great committee. Particular thanks to Jim. Kate's on via Zoom, and Cynthia as well, getting all of our minutes together and keeping us on track. You know, it's been a great committee, and I think some of my initial remarks at the very beginning were I wanted this to be a collegial group and a sharing of ideas. I think everybody has been terrific at doing that. We are coming down to the final strokes here, but again, we'll make some comments at the next meeting, but I appreciate everybody's input and comments, and again, particular thanks to Jim for all the information and guidance he's provided, so.
And to Cynthia, by the way.
Oh, I mentioned
Together, I don't know, so many pages
threw it
of
to this.
minutes.
Yeah.
But I just want to add, just to piggyback off of what John said, is it's really about you creating an atmosphere where we can discuss things that we may not necessarily agree on and come to a conclusion that's really useful. I would compliment you on your work in shepherding us in that direction. There were times when it wasn't easy, and I think you did a really great job listening to everybody, and that's all reflected in this memo, so thank you very much for that.
Thank you. Well,
We're not done yet.
we're not done yet, yeah.
We have to have our
The
document
bluebirds
completed
will come
yet.
out at the last minute, so.
Have you got a time for that 24th
Well,
meeting?
when I've got the four committee, could we, I'm wide open on the 24th. If anybody wants to,
Is that a Tuesday or
It's a
Monday?
Monday, yeah.
that was for the subcommittee to meet. We met last time at 2.
I can do it a little bit later because I got an appointment at 1:30, so
You wanna
can we
do-
do 2:30 maybe?
Yeah, we want to say 3.
3?
Ken, can you make 3?
I've got the whole afternoon available.
Okay, we'll say 3. Kathy?
Yeah, I can do that. It's a question of what space is available.
Okay, so we'll say 3. So.
I can work around that.
Okay, so I would, again, unless people have any comments they want to share now, I would ask that you provide the comments to Cynthia, and she'll send them to everybody. Cynthia, I don't know, I guess you can send them out as you get them, rather than hold them all, that way we can start taking a look at them. And then the subcommittee will meet and revise this memo. If we meet on the 24th, I will pledge to get this out to everybody by Wednesday, the 26th, so
Yeah,
everybody.
because
has-
this committee meets again on the 28th.
28th, yeah,
Oh, okay,
so,
I'm working in Connecticut on the 28th,
okay.
so I'll try to make it back, I just can't say that.
Okay, well, we'll get the revised draft on the
Yeah.
28th out, or by the 26th, so everybody
And then
will
I
have
can
that time.
comment or whatever.
And you can, yeah, you know, so, and then at our final meeting, we'll discuss that. And I did talk to Craig Tamish, the president, and while the 28th is our last meeting and the committee sunsets on the 31st, he was fine if we needed a little extra time to polishing up the memo, so the memo doesn't need to be on his desk for the council on the 31st. So, you know, we have a little time after that to clean that up. But again, I'm hoping that by the 28th, by what I sent out on the 26th, you know, the 28th will be more of a final review any other kind of final tweaks to that, so. Good, okay. So unless you have, again, you didn't have a whole lot of time to review it before the meeting here, but look forward to seeing any comments there. With that, let's see,
Minutes.
we have minutes, yes. We had carryover from the last two meetings. We had approval of minutes for January 31st and February 11th. Is there a motion to approve those minutes?
So moved.
Second? All in favor?
Aye.
It has to be,
Aye.
it has to be a roll call.
Oh, roll call vote, all right, because Charlie,
Charlie's
when I
on
Cynthia,
Zoom.
Cynthia will conduct
Okay.
that.
Council members, Catherine Ledeck.
Council members, it's funny. Suddenly we got elevated without any extra work, right? Yes.
Ken Alsman.
Here, yes.
Councilor Jeffrey Mendez.
Abstain.
Councilor John Crow.
Yes.
Councilor Charlie Bloom.
Yes.
Chair of Committee Bob Schulte.
Yes,
Seth Etienne.
Yes.
It passes.
Thank you very much.
and before we, Kate, I've seen you on, I just wanted to say, did you have any thoughts or comments for the committee at this point?
No, I was gonna ask about, I do have some comments on the memo, which I read, but you said that what you want us to do is send them to Cindy, and that makes perfect sense, so we're not all editing the same document. But nothing further as far as how the meeting has been run. I thought you've done a great job.
Thank you. All right, and our next meeting, our final meeting, next and final meeting will be March 28th at 3:30 in this room. The subcommittee, the four will meet on Monday, the 24th. What did we say, 3 o'clock?
3 o'clock.
3 o'clock. Can you confirm that with?
I will.
I looked on the,
The only thing that's scheduled that night is a planning board meeting.
yeah, I didn't see anything else there, so as long as we can do this, and it's my understanding, we don't need to have the Zoom capability with Sarah, we just need to make sure the room's available.
Correct.
So, okay, great. With that, geez, we're gonna.
Move to adjourn.
Yeah, move to adjourn,
Second.
all in favor?
Aye.
Go for it.
You gotta do a roll call.
Oh, I got a roll call. Don't go away yet, Charlie.
Here I am.
Committee members, Catherine Ledeck.
Yes.
Ken Alsman.
Yeah.
Councilor Jeffrey Mendez.
Yes.
Councilor John Crow.
Yes.
Councilor Charlie Bloom.
Yes.
Seth Etienne.
Yes.
And Chair of Committee Bob Schulte.
Yes,
You are adjourned.
thank you.